So when we say fear is an emotion of connection, it grounds itself, it becomes curiosity, and later on courage. What does the child learn? Fear, parents, safety, curiosity, courage. Fear, it means the parent is a safe place, the world is a safe place, except it's not. But for many people, the world is chronically, when we are really honest, is chronically unsafe. I need to convince myself that it's great, that it's safe, that I'm good. But actually, deeper down, for many people, there is a nagging underlying anxiety that all the time something can go wrong.
Okay, Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
To get started, can you maybe tell us about the sequence of events that led you to writing Attuned? And also, how does this link with your work with collective trauma?
Yes. Um, so already 20 plus years, I'm very interested in of course collective trauma and how the systemic trauma affects our societies, our organizations, family systems, like how there's a much wider trauma web than we often think when we hear the word trauma, and we think, oh, it's a person. And of course, it's also affecting the person. But I think it's way bigger, and I think if we think trauma bigger, then it also is much more beneficial for the healing process. So I was working on collective trauma fields, but at the same time, I think a big part of our work is actually how to refine our own integration and training of our nervous system so that we can be attuned to the people that we work with. When people run groups as facilitators, when people are therapists or work with clients as coaches, I think our capacity to be attuned and that my nervous system can pick up from my clients a lot of information when it's open and attuned. So we did a lot of, for more than 2 decades, we did a lot of training programs also on that. That's why many professionals come to us into the training programs. Because they feel how beneficial that attunement process is. And so after I wrote Healing Collective Trauma, I thought, okay, now it's time for a book that addresses more like some of the more individual or individually applied techniques of our work. And then I thought, no, maybe Attuned is the book that's needed now to describe that process better and see also how building more attuned, resonant, and connected relationships is actually also part of a societal resilience program, that when we have more people that really see the power of relationships and apply that, then the society will be more resilient to work on the collective trauma. Of course, it has a positive rebound effect. Yeah, so that was a little bit the cascade of things that led up to writing this book. And yeah, so I think, and then, yeah, and then I also wanted to write about what we call IAC fluidity, like individual, ancestral, and collective fluidity, like how we liquefy the non-emergent, the frozen parts in individuals, in our ancestral relationships, in our collectives, so that the developmental process of a society can grow. So, for example, that we can be more adaptive to respond to the necessities of climate change in a different way, because now it feels like we're kind of lagging behind and many things are not working. There's a lot of sand in the engine. And I think that sand in the systemic engine is the trauma field that doesn't want to change. That's the opposite of change. You know, it wants to be frozen. And there's a good reason why, because there was a lot of pain. And so, how to liquefy those structures that we, evolutionary wise, we are more adaptive to what's really needed in the world as a humanity, but also as a biosphere, I think is very important.
I can't think of anything more important than that. So I think let's start with the basics here. Like, what do you mean by the word attunement? And I would love here, Thomas, if we could bring in the story from the book where you mention a mother brought her 1-year-old to you that had recently experienced a serious shock. Do you know what I'm talking about here? If you could maybe tell that story as well, I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, so like basically we are talking about something very natural to our nervous system, which means you and I and everybody listening went through the whole developmental ladder. There was a conception. We grew up in the womb of our mothers, and then we grew in a more or less ideal attachment environment. We grew up and we felt or we didn't feel the benefit of attuned relationships and co-regulation, so that our parents co-regulate with us, but that our parents naturally have a built-in capacity to be attuned to a child. And so do we with our children. So when I often say, when my daughter comes and says, Daddy, Daddy, I'm scared, if I were to answer, oh, don't be scared, there is no danger in the house. So what did I just do? I devalued her emotion. I said, don't be scared, but actually she is scared. And then I answer her, give her a rational answer, but she has an emotional request. So she doesn't feel co-regulated with. She actually stays more alone with her feeling because I tell her, don't be scared because I'm busy and I need to do things. But the other way will be, and she says, Daddy, Daddy, I'm scared. That I say, yes, I turn to her, I feel her, and I say, yes, I feel you scared. Come to me, come. And in that moment, my nervous system attunes to her nervous system. But let's say she's 3 years old. So my nervous system attunes to her in the state of 3 years old because my nervous system knows that state. It matured through that ladder. We all have that ladder inside. So when we talk about attunement, we talk about emotional resonance. I feel you're scared. We talk about stress co-regulation. Come to me. In that moment, my nervous system syncs up with her nervous system. There's a synchronization. Her stress levels reduce, her fear levels can come down, and she can ground herself again in the body. Her body will open up. Her fear will switch after some time into curiosity. And then anyway, the parents are not so interesting. You know, the parents are only interesting when there is a danger. Otherwise, the world is much more interesting. So kids go off and explore the world. So when we say fear is an emotion of connection, it grounds itself, it becomes curiosity, and later on courage. What does the child learn? Fear, parents, safety, curiosity, courage. Fear, it means the parent is a safe place, the world is a safe place, except it's not. But for many people, the world is chronically, when we are really honest, is chronically unsafe. I need to convince myself that it's great, that it's safe, that I'm good. But actually, deeper down, for many people, there is a nagging underlying anxiety that all the time something can go wrong. I don't know. I'm not sure about my relationship. I'm not sure about my job. I'm not sure about, like, there's fear in the base. And so that's important. So there's emotional resonance, there's stress or physical resonance that can co-regulate, and then there is the age appropriation, which means when, as you said, when a child comes to me that is 1 year old and fell from the table and is medically is okay but is shocked, then even my nervous system attuning to a 1 year old nervous system means I am not becoming fully 1 years old and regress. I am still a grown up, but my nervous system activates a special quality that matches a 1 year old nervous system. And so when in the moment I create a resonant relationship, but a specific resonant relationship, that's important. It's not just I see a child, but I'm a grown up. No, I see a child And I'm a grown up, but at the same time, I ping a different developmental age. And I believe, and I have seen many times that when we are more precise, attunement is more effective because it really addresses the state, the time, space, rhythm of the child's nervous system. And that helped the child to co-regulate, to release more and more the stress, to digest the shock and open up again to the body. And then the child became more and more curious again. You felt the child was a bit frozen. And after a few minutes, the child started to become curious. They look around. They are more interested in the environment. They're not any, like, we are more here. And then, the laughter comes back, the joy comes back. And it's actually a very simple process. And in that case, the child wasn't injured. It was just shocked from the event. And still, if you don't pay attention to this, maybe it leaves a little scar. If you pay attention to this, it integrates itself, and then the process can continue, and the experience will be integrated as learning. Yeah, so that's a little bit of a, I know it's a long answer, but I think, speaks to attunement well.
That's beautifully said. So just to sort of clarify here, if a child goes through something or they go through some fear or they're scared of something and the adult that is with them effectively co-regulates, then that resonance then sort of becomes internalized within the child, and then they carry that with them in their own internal system. And then conversely, if the child's emotions are invalidated, where the parent says, don't be scared, or there's nothing to be afraid about, or whatever, then the child then learns that their emotions aren't valid and they shouldn't pay attention to them. So they sort of push them away. Is this what can happen?
Exactly that, like that the attunement that the parents, I often say parents are actualizing children's potential. So when a child comes, and sometimes children come, they draw something and they say, look, daddy, daddy, or mommy, mommy, look what I drew. And then if you say, yeah, it's nice, but if you take a moment and you take the drawing and you look at it and you feel the drawing, you empower the creativity of the child. The child will notice, because children are super attuned to their parents. So they will notice, wow, you really looked at it, and you confirm, you actualize the creative potential by confirming it. And so the child feels empowered. Say, yes, I'm creative. I can do things by myself. I can influence this world, which is amazing. And if you grow up like this, you feel when you're like a young grown up, you can do whatever you want to do in this world. You just need to put the energy into it. And you have the power inside to influence this world. And and to co-create something in this world, this is deeply empowering in our agency. I know I can really make a difference in this world, and I can bring my passion, and it's being seen, validated, which is empowering. On the other hand, also emotionally, if a child cannot be angry, so children go through, let's say, um, their autonomy movement. So at the beginning, the child is more dependent, and then the child wants to be independent. Okay, it's like a circle from dependence to independence to interdependence. And so when the child is dependent, we feed the child. But one day the child wants to take the spoon and eat. And if the parents don't allow it, the child will get angry. Say, no, I want to eat. And that anger is healthy. It says, I can do it. And it gives a grounding to the child's body. It says, I can do it. And so that's a lovely, but if that's a lovely energy. But if people prevent the child from growing, then pressure will build up and the child will get angry. And if then we cannot be with the child as a parent because that anger triggers me, and then I become angry and I try to shut it down in the child, of course, empowerment's not going to happen from it. And also autonomy is not going to happen. It will just create more shock on the strength. So it will be frozen strength, maybe. And the same is with fear. When children come and they're afraid and they feel, oh, I can land in my parent. As you said, I internalize the co-regulation and self-regulation. And then as the child's nervous system matures, the self-regulation will get stronger and stronger. Then the child can sleep well. The child can regulate his emotions. When it gets triggered, it can regulate much faster. It doesn't stay in exaggerated states. So there are many, when the child goes to school, this will show itself, how the child shows up in social environments. So it has a whole cascade of after effects that come from internalized regulation, and also that the body is open. We feel when we are well co-regulated or well regulated, we feel grounded. And what does that mean? I feel the soil. I can feel the ground. I can feel, wow, the planet and I are not separate. But when there is a lot of fear in the base that we need to manage, then sentences like, yes, you need to contribute to life, but life is a river that's happening anyway. It's not just, but people who don't have that, they feel everything depends, I need to hold myself. So there's contraction in the base, in the pelvis, in the legs, in the belly. And then it feels like, yeah, but I can't trust that life also lives through me anyway. I can trust the flow of life. I can, because I never learned to fully relax into being held by my parents. That's why I often say, like parents are like two trees, and the child is like in a hammock. If the two trees have the right distance, so it's like when you lay in a hammock, you can let your body fully rest and hang in the air. Basically, you're hanging, and you, if you can give your body, it feels like you can fully exhale. And so when the parents are too far apart, which means they're neglecting the child needs to hold itself because it's not being held. And if the parents are too tight, too over controlling, then it will create a lot of tension in the child. So it will create a lot of anger. And so there's the right distance. So as the child grows, the autonomy movement is growing, and the child needs more space in the family system. If parents can give that space in a related way, not like and not like, but in a related way, then the child learns about boundaries. A boundary is, I feel related. It's a dance between two energy fields, two nervous systems. I say ping, it says dong. I say ping, it says dong. In that dance, I learn to develop my boundaries. I learn to say what I need in the relationship. But if that doesn't work, then I begin to hyper regulate my inner self because I cannot regulate it in the relationship. And so, for many people, to learn to regulate myself, to say what I want to say, to be attuned while, like, to feel you while I say what I have to say, this is not that given for many people because we never learned that really. Because when we said something, either we were shut down, there was not somebody that really received us. So that's disturbed. And then we don't we don't feel any more natural boundaries. We don't feel them in others, so we transgress them sometimes, or we are so withdrawn that we feel we have no voice. And I think there is a lot in being attuned. It's like in martial art that it's like a dance between two bodies or two forces. It's not like it's like a it's a and that movement, I think, is healthy relationship. Then I can negotiate my own needs and your needs by being attuned. And I think that's very, very healthy.
Wow. You know, as you were speaking earlier, I was just thinking, if you're able to do this work properly and sort of have this orientation in life towards greater attunement, like you can essentially be a regulating presence in the world. Every interaction that you have, you can help to open up somebody a little bit more and just have that kind of effect. And we've all been around someone that's like super present, super open, super aware, and it has such a good effect on us, And I just think it's such a good thing to aim for. But I wanted to ask Thomas, as you were speaking there about the hammock metaphor, which I thought was excellent, by the way, if someone didn't get that from their parents at a young age, and they do feel that sense of contraction that they're not in the flow of life and they have to make everything happen and they can't sort of maybe let go a little bit. How how would you work with someone to help them heal that and maybe open a little bit more?
Yeah, first I want to say that what you just said before with the presence and the co-regulation, that's very true because a well-regulated nervous system becomes an ecosystem because all the relationships that we have will be affected by that, as you said, by presence, regulation, being able to be attuned to the people that we interact with. If you're like a leader in an organization, or you're working in a team, or you're a parent, or you're a teacher, it becomes an ecosystem. And then it shows, or if you work as a medical professional with your patients, it this spreads. And so that inner state is really an asset, and it becomes an ecosystemic property. It's not just an individual, it's not just happening in me, it happens around me also. And that shows, when we talk about impact, that's an amazing impact to have. Imagine teachers being able to co-regulate with their students and their kids in class, or medical professionals to with patients that are anyway often in crisis, in pain, in stress. We need more of that, and or leaders in organizations. The generosity, the openness, the listening, the clarity that comes from it is like creates an ecosystem. So I wanted just to highlight that that's a very, very important aspect. And then with how we work with it, first of all, that we depathologize that when it is that way, something is wrong with me. If I cannot trust life, I should be trusting life. I should be able to do this. But should is another pressure on the pressure. So that is not really helpful because, and we all carry these parts in us, like these self-critical parts. I should be different. I should be more able to do this, that, or not do this and that. But I think like this, we cannot really heal. What's healing is to say, yes, I acknowledge I grew up in this family. These were my circumstances. And everything that's in me now, as maybe as a grown up or as a teenager, this is the best I and my nervous system and my biology could do in those given circumstances. That's number one. It's not that because I have tension in my body, or I'm contracted in my body, or I hold a lot of fear, I'm a bad person. Not at all. That was needed. I needed to hold my fear because I haven't been held. It's very simple. And so, what I feel sometimes is dysfunction. That's why I often say a symptom is the echo of the original process. Like when you're in a cave and somebody screams, and as long as you see the person screaming and you hear the scream, it's the scream, it's the present, it's the process. But once you hear it in the echo of the echo of the echo of the echo of the echo, it's the symptom, because you don't hear the person screaming, you hear the person's echo of the scream. So when, as a 2-year old, I needed to hold a lot of fear because of an incident in my life, and that crystallizes and became chronic, there was a moment when that movement happened. That was the process. That's the person screaming. Ever since, I feel tight in my belly or in my pelvis or in my legs, and I don't feel fully, I can exhale into the world. I can digest my life. It feels like I exhale a bit and then I feel the fear. And so, yeah, that is the symptom of the original process. So once we depathologize that there's something wrong, and I say, no, in that moment, I needed to tighten my body in order to hold the fear. There was no other option. This was the most intelligent thing to do. Or when people withdraw and then they say, oh, I'm lonely, or it's hard for me to be very relaxed when I go to a party or something. And I always feel like a stress to connect to people when I go to a party. Yeah, but that stress has a reason. It's not that it's there without a reason. That's an intelligent function. Maybe it doesn't show up in the party that way, but where that originated, it was very intelligent. It fits absolutely to the ecosystem where I come from. That's why I often say a defense mechanism makes ecosystemically completely sense and has an ecosystemic impact today, which means that a person is not just a separate person. We are always an individual and we are the ecosystem, which means when I grow up in a family, like when my father is kind of choleric, or for people that their father was like drank a lot of alcohol, and that's why when he came home he was aggressive. Every time my father came home and I looked for a space to be safe. I looked to not be visible. And today I say, oh, I'm not being promoted in my company because people don't see me. I might have great skills, but I'm a kind of invisible. But that invisibility made perfect sense in a volatile home. But of course, I'm suffering from it today because I feel it's affecting my life and my career, and I have much more to offer, and I can't offer it. And so, but many people say, this is wrong. And I would say, let's create a culture that says defense mechanisms are as intelligent as the person that needed to create that. And then we can work with it. And then I can say, okay, let's go there and let's feel the intelligence of holding your body. Let's feel the intelligence of containing fear. And then we do it in relation today. And in relation today, we can see, oh, if I can attune to the 2-year-old in you that needed to tighten up, then we have a specific relationship to the fear that was in the organism at the time. And gently we co-regulate today what hasn't been co-regulated then. So we start to build an internalized regulation, maybe 30 years later, but we are building an internalized regulation and digestion of fear that couldn't happen at the time when it was frozen. But the important thing to see is that trauma, in a modern language, we could say trauma is an unupdatable area. So when it happened at age 2 and it was frozen, this part of me cannot receive updates. This part of me cannot grow. It will be frozen in time. So that's why it still resides on the level of 2 years old. And that's why I believe everybody who works with this kind of younger parts, it needs the capacity open to attune to these younger parts, as we said before, with the ladder. And then it's specific. And I believe the person's nervous system notices the specific relationship. It's not just a 40-year-old person in my office, it's the 40-year-old with a 2-year-old frozen layer that needs to be specifically addressed. And then we can grow the regulation that couldn't grow at that time together until we feel the body relaxes more, the fear gets digested and integrated, the stress levels subside, and we feel people feel more grounded. And I have seen thousands of people like feel we can change that. That's not, carved into stone or carved in stone. It's written on paper, which means we can change our biography in many ways.
Really like that. So we're sort of saying that that traumatized part, whether it happened at 2 years old or 3 years old or 4 years old, is almost frozen in time. And by addressing that directly and depathologizing it, you're essentially allowing its space then to be opened up with and co-regulated with. So then it can start to sort of reintegrate back in the person's system and then maybe to relax a bit and feel okay.
Yes, because like let's say there's another image that I like to use because I think it describes it very well. It's like when you say a grown-up self, when we're grown up, is like an orchestra. I don't know, you have 5 violin players, you have a saxophone, you have you have a pianist, and you have all kinds of musicians sitting in your orchestra. That's your grown-up function. And so the 2-year-old developmental process that couldn't uh, fulfill itself didn't send a musician yet into the orchestra. So there is either a vacant place, or there is a place where the musician is not attuned to the rest of the orchestra. It didn't make it into. So that's why what we call regressive moments. So you have an argument with your spouse, or in your job somebody triggers you, and then you respond like a 3-year-old. And then say, oh, that's when the 3-year-old part is playing like wildly, whatever it wants. And the rest of the orchestra either keeps playing, then it's okay. Then it sounds a bit strange, but everybody keeps on playing. But if the rest of the orchestra gets really annoyed and stops playing, then one musician is going to take the full stage. And sometimes you see people lose their awareness of their grown-up perspective and become completely identified with a very young place, which means in that moment, the person has only like a 3-year-old perspective and reaction or trigger, which can, of course, lead to re-traumatization, because today the person is in a grown-up body, but does things that are painful to others because the rest of the orchestra is not playing, which means we cannot hold certain functions of maturity, which means contradiction, emotional intensity, regulation, all these functions disintegrate in that moment. And that's important. So yes, I think when the trauma is not integrated, it's kind of frozen in time, literally. And as it matures, we see this also in the healing process. We see that energy that is frozen somewhere in the body, when it opens, creates an upward movement. So information comes up and becomes a new way of expressing, relating, interacting with the world. And one stream goes down the spine, and the body relaxes more, and the body grounds itself more. And that information can be integrated into the grown-up perspective, which means every time we heal trauma, we actually learn and grow, which is amazing. It's like it's the ultimate investment strategy, because the more trauma we heal in the world, the person heals, the ecosystem heals, the world heals a bit more. So it's actually a win-win-win for everybody. And not to forget that the information that needed to be held, that is frozen, it's actually a bit the wrong word, frozen, because it means we need to freeze it. Like which means, like, everybody who's listening now, when I ask you, what's your freezer doing? Yeah, your freezer is most probably freezing your food. So, but who pays the electricity bill? You. So when we say there's trauma from the past in the body, but actually to keep the trauma frozen needs electricity. It's not frozen and that's it. It's held, and there's holding or freezing happening. So it actually needs all the time life energy to keep it frozen. And that life energy I don't have available for my life, for being a creative person in the world, for relating, for having fun, for making good contributions to the world. So trauma healing means I release what is stuck, but I also release what's holding it stuck. So it's actually a double boost of energy, which is, I think, and when we think about this on the collective level, there's a lot of energy stored in humanity from all the pain and all the large wounds that we are not using. We are not using that energy for our collective development.
Wow, these metaphors are great. So we're sort of saying here that this holding these parts requires a great deal of life energy. So if you can work with them and free them up, a lot of that energy is then released for living and relating and just maybe contributing more to the world and everything else as well. So this is super important work to be doing. And there's a quote in your website that I really liked, and I think it sort of encapsulates what you're talking about here. It says, presence is a place where the past is being alchemized into now. Is that what we're getting at here? Is this the same thing?
Yes, it's like, because like when the two of us are relating right now, When you feel me and I feel you, there's a present relationship. Our conversation is happening now. But if there is in you or me, there is like a young fear, let's say, of this 2 year old. So then that fear will continuously come up. And but when we have an attuned relationship that is present, that's what I said before. We can attune to this 2 year old fear, create a connection, and through the relating, which is a present process, we actually onboard the frozen past into the present moment. And that's what healing means. That's what also often happens is that our heart, our emotions, our body awareness create a kind of a connection. And that's why the frozen information can melt, be experienced and integrated. And then what the so-called past is actually, that's why I often say, and I wrote it also in the book, that I think there's a misconception about history. I would say integrated history is having this conversation now. The parts in you and the parts in me and in all of us that are listening that are part of this conversation, that is the integrated history of all of our ancestors. That we can talk about that stuff, that we understand enough science to talk about this, that we have the maybe the spiritual or the emotional maturity, that we are sitting in a physical body that can perform all the functions that are needed to do this, to have this conversation. All of this is not, most of it is not what we developed. Our ancestors developed livers and all kinds of stuff. You know, it's not that we have the copyright. Although some people try to get the genetic copyrights for this, which I think is a problem. But the we are sitting in the development of millions of years, and that is presence. When it's integrated, it is presence. So I would say integrated history is not somewhere behind us. Integrated history is here. But the not integrated history, the traumatized history, either from our child time or our ancestors' adversities that they went through, our collective traumatizations, all of that information is not integrated and present. It's actually overshadowing. It's affecting shame, fear, anger, aggression, numbness, absence. All of this is affecting how we interact with each other, how we make decisions today, how we develop technology, how we develop science. And I think that's important distinction to be made.
For sure. So, in some sense, we could say that we're carrying our ancestors within our nervous system almost, or some of their traumas. And then whenever we're able to work on that ourselves and heal that ourselves, we're healing their traumas, but we're also healing that for our descendants too. So we're breaking a line of suffering here.
Exactly, exactly. We have the power to heal our biographical trauma, but we also have the power to tune in and open up the traumatizations that our ancestors went through, that live through us as tendencies, that live through us as maybe emotions we cannot connect biographically. Because some people say, listen, I had quite an okay childhood and I didn't, but I have these symptoms. Yeah, but if your parents or your grandparents went through a war, most probably there will be symptoms in your life that you don't understand biographically, but they happen. There might be fears, there might be stress, there might be all kinds of things. And we know we know mystically, but we also know more and more scientifically that epigenetics are transferring, it's like an intergenerational communication that transfers some of the trauma aspects to the next generations. And I think that's great to know because it gives us an orientation, but it also shows we can literally, as you said, break some of the vicious or melt some of the vicious cycles and develop intergenerational learning, which I think is fantastic.
For sure. Okay, so let's break it into another metaphor that I've heard you use elsewhere. Parents are the piano, children are playing the keyboard.
That's right. Yeah, it's great because what we said before, first of all, we all have this ladder inside, the developmental ladder. We were 5 months, a year, 3 years, like we all grew through this ladder. And And we could say it's a letter, but we could also say it's like a piano. The lowest keys when you were in the womb of your mother, and then we came all out and we developed, and we have all kinds of keys until the very high keys, let's say more the spiritual dimension. And so we are playing on this keyboard. And when kids, some of these keys are very well tuned, which means they're integrated. When you play them, it feels like that's the key. A C is a C. But like when I carry trauma as a 3-year old or 5-year old, when my child becomes 3 or 5 and it hits that key, which means it pings my nervous system just by the age that it becomes, I will suddenly feel things that I cannot explain. I will get more triggered. I will maybe get more angry. I will feel more numb. I say, well, how should I deal with this? I don't know how to deal with that. Many people also, when their kids become adolescent or in their teens, they get very triggered by their kids that kind of need more autonomy. But when the parent is hurt a bit in that stage, then they can't really respond. So it becomes like a fight. It becomes, instead of a hosting, a mature guidance. Yeah, and if there's anger, we will be with the anger. And if there is fear, we'll be with the fear. And if there is, I don't know, all kinds of dynamics, we'll be there. But for some of us, we can. So when the child plays the keyboard and it hits such a key, of course the child keeps hitting that key that sounds strange, but the parent-child relationship will become more difficult. And sometimes people say, "Oh, I have a difficult child," but no, we don't have difficult children. We the relationship to the expression of the child becomes compromised. And that's why we cannot deal with the maybe also the symptoms that come up in the child because of that. And that's a fragile moment. But that also says that if, and that's why I often say it's very interesting that in one way we are such a developed society. We have so many things. Every business leader has a coach, and every, like, you have supervision and you have this and you have that. But what we are lacking is a mainstream, affordable parent schooling system. We don't really have like a good, like a mainstream supervision process for parenting. And with all we know about childhood development and attachment trauma, how come we don't have that? And that's a good question, because it's not just that that's a mistake, that's a symptom. Like the one that screams in the cave and the echo. It's not just, oh, we should have a parent school. We also need to ask ourselves the question, what's actually the unconscious inhibition of not having it? What works here that we don't have it? Because if we talk so much about healing and so many people go to therapy and attachment therapy, why don't we have a better process that is also affordable, that is not just affordable by a very privileged group of people? It's mainstream available, that parenting needs kind of a supervision. Like when the kids hit the keys that are not tuned well, there's a system to take care of it. There's a kind of a second layer, and then you get your reflections as a parent, and you get your you actually see that that's a healing moment for us as parents, to expand our own being and become more mature. It's amazing. But it's a good question why we don't have that on a mainstream level. What actually prevents that?
If there's an ambitious entrepreneur listening to this that would like to change the world, I think that is something that would definitely do if someone was able to set that up. So yeah. Um, okay, so I'd love to jump to something from the book that I've thought was really interesting. There's a section where you talk a lot about consciousness, and there's a quote from John Wheeler, which I'd love to just bring up here. No phenomenon is a real phenomenon unless it is an observed phenomenon. Could you maybe expand on this and why this is important whenever we're talking about attunement and attachment?
Yeah, it's like we I think in the when we look at process, Like we are all the time, we are a process all the time. So when we talk about consciousness, we are talking about the capacity to be aware of the process. And so in the book, I also describe three different forces that I think we are composed out of. One is being. Being is space. Being is the capacity to just be, but also the capacity to reflect, to digest content, to digest our life, to integrate and learn. And being is a fundamental function of awareness. So being is connected in major contemplative traditions to the capacity to witness what's happening in myself, to witness how I interact with the world, to be aware of the process. We call this also sometimes like a 4D consciousness, like three-dimensional experience, embodied experience plus space time. So then I'm aware of what's happening. And sometimes we are not aware of what's happening because we're so in the process that we cannot witness the process. And I think as long as we have the capacity to witness what's happening in us, that's a function of maturity also. So and it's also true sometimes in the innovation process. Otto Schama also speaks a lot about this, like in the theory U, that in presence the future emerges. And that's also what the mystical traditions would say. It's not the future is not a later point in time. The future is that which emerges in presence. Before we talked about the onboarding of the past in presence, but it's also the downloading of the future happens in presence. So because you're creative only now, whenever that now is, suddenly you have an idea now. You don't have the idea later. So you don't, and tomorrow it's also now when you have another idea. And so the future is not a later point in time. The future is what emerges when I'm present, when I'm able to listen, when I'm grounded, when I'm connected. Then I have all kinds of insights. And and so we could say also that when you take the principle of the genius, if it's not a person, if it's a principle, then you could say the virgin birth, also in the tradition, the virgin birth is actually that suddenly there is an insight, and at that moment nobody can say where it came from. It just happened. It's just then I can step back and can look at it and can analyze it and can do all kinds of scientific experiments and can say, oh, this insight is this and this and that's this. So, but that's already in the reflection. But in the moment of the virgin birth, in the moment that somebody has a real breakthrough, the breakthrough is. That's why you can't predict it. It's like it's a process that is spontaneous in presence. And that's amazing. So the virgin birth is in a way the only moment when we are connected to the future without that we premeditated that before. Because it's not innovative to take your sofa from this area of the living room and put it there and then put the table there and then you say it's a new living room. No, it's a reorganized living room that looks maybe nicer now, but that's not innovation. Innovation is something happens and somebody has a new insight that then becomes something. But in the moment of the insight, there is no separation. There's also no space from the inside. There is just inside happening. And I think that's the principle of the virgin birth, is that something is being born. And then we ask ourselves, okay, where is the father? But that's already a moment to step back and say, oh, how did the child come here? Like, how has it been created? But in the creation moment, it's being one with creation in that moment. And that's why I think that process is something that sometimes contemplative practices or people that are very creative in their nature, that happens to them very often, that they have new insights and they are really new. They are not like repetition or recombination there's something fresh. And oh, yeah, I kind of never heard that before. It's like, things that you hear and it's just a different version. It's a 14.6.1.3, or it's 15. It's new. It's like, and so I think that's also good. But I think consciousness is I'm aware of the process. And that's an important function that I think drowns a bit in some of the Western capitalistic fast progress values, that we have too little space to digest. And that's also true. So these are two dimensions of what you spoke to.
That that's going to be on my mind for weeks now, Thomas. Thanks very much. That was absolutely mind blowing. It reminds me of something I heard that guy Eckhart Tolle say: the quality of your future depends exactly on the quality of your consciousness in the present moment, because that's where the future emerges from, you know. Um, I don't know if you have time. I know you've got to get going, but I wanted to ask one last question about um the three sync process. Could you maybe, I think that could be a cool note to end on for people. Could you maybe take us through that and how that can help?
Okay, let's do that. Yeah. So three sync means the synchronization between the body functions, our emotions, mental functions, and presence, space. We just described space. And so, like, after everything we just heard, let's take a breath and say, okay, when I let this conversation drop in and I notice what's happening in my inner world right now, how do you feel listening to this conversation? What's resonating? What's not resonating? What speaks to your experience too? It's also a way of letting information that we listen to or consume or get to ground itself, to embody that information more. As you do that, to let your breath is a very old friend, and to let your breath, maybe you want to slow down and prolong your exhalations a little bit. And every time you exhale, drop a bit deeper into your body perceptions, to your sitting or your body posture. And notice where do you feel safe, warm, connected, and open in your body. Still your breath, your exhalations take you even deeper. And see, safe, warm, open, energized, grounded parts of your body. And through your body sensations, you can also feel into the closeness or distance you feel right now from the ground or to the ground. Sometimes when our body is very relaxed, we feel very close to the ground, just open breathing. And there's more stress in our bodies. We feel a bit more uprooted, less connected. And just accept any way you find And as you connect it to your physical body, let's see what's your emotional inner environment. Sometimes emotions are strong, sometimes they're very subtle, like a background glow, and sometimes we don't feel any emotion. Just notice. And also notice the state of your mind. Is your mind relaxed, open, busy, calm? And as you notice these different parts of your nervous system, different parts of your being, maybe you also notice what's aware of all this information. I feel my body. I'm aware that I feel my body. And I notice awareness, I don't think about what's aware. I notice awareness directly, like a sense of inner space, sense of witnessing, a bit of sense of stillness. And then gently take a deeper breath and feel your body well and slowly come back to us. Yeah.
Well, that was pretty cool. I feel very, very relaxed right now. Um, so thank you very much, Thomas. I've enjoyed every minute of this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed Attuned as well. I highly recommend people to get a copy. Where can people learn more about you and your work after this conversation?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation too. It was a beautiful space that you opened up for us here. And yeah, I think my main website, thomashübl.com. Hübl is HUEBL.com, thomashübl.com. Our Collective Trauma Summit.com is a great summit every year with many speakers, I think, that speak to the topic of collective trauma from very different disciplines. And maybe also our NGO, the Pocket Project, pocketproject.org is our NGO through which we do some collective trauma work globally. So that's a great place to also learn more about the hands-on work that we do in different parts of the world. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for the space.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and I want to wish you all the best with with the work you're doing going forward. It's super important, and the world needs it. So, best of luck.
Thank you.